Okay, so JLA League of One. God, this story is amazing. If this story had been released as part of DC Rebirth, then it would be the best thing come out of DC Rebirth. For real and for true. Like, it would be the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth because this story is so good. So here's a little bit of backstory to this, a little bit of exposition, so to speak. The reason why this is called JLA instead of Justice League of America is because after Crisis on Infinite Earths, there was no Justice League of America. There was no Flash, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Superman, so on and so forth. There was no cohesive Justice League team. There was Justice League International, but there was no cohesive like core Justice League team. JLI or Justice League International was just like Batman leading a hodgepodge of people who just couldn't hold their own books. And it was actually a pretty genius idea. It was a way for DC to basically expose fans to characters that they would normally never read. And we got to see some really, really cool interactions, like Guy Gardner getting just like decked by Batman in one shot. It was pretty cool, but the debates and the arguments and things like that they would have were always pretty fun to read. But in 1998, DC brought back the Justice League of America and they simply called it JLA. Now, in truth, I've actually been toying with this idea. We're going to cover New 52 Justice League when the Justice League movie comes out. So we'll cover like Darkseid War and all that kind of stuff. And that will segue directly into the Justice League of America DC Rebirth. It's the reason why we stopped Batman when we did Endgame is because the stories Bloom and Epilogue actually create continuity issues when it comes to Darkseid War and like Batman being the god of knowledge and so on and so forth. It's easier to just stop with Endgame and then just jump into Darkseid War with Justice League. So, but nonetheless, you know, it was really kind of a cool thing. But with JLA, it was designed to basically focus on the Justice League of America as a core team, almost like in the post-crisis landscape. So it was basically like we were getting the team for the very first time. And we got some really, really cool stories, Tower of Babel, so on and so forth. But this is actually an original graphic novel, meaning this does not fit neatly into any continuity. It just gives us the Justice League of America team in a particular story that took place somewhere. DC just doesn't really tell us where. But the fact remains here that this is cool because it shows Wonder Woman with a pretty ingenuitive state, but it also really focuses a lot on like the mythology that goes on with the Wonder Woman landscape, the fates and, you know, the, I guess like Oracle and water nymphs and tree nymphs and a dragon and her beating the hell out of the Justice League. It's really cool. It's a really, really cool scenario. So initially what this does is this basically picks up with a dragon by the name of Dracul Carfang. Now, the cool thing about this is that we basically get this scenario, at least as it's done by, you know, Christopher Meller or Moeller. I can't remember exactly how you pronounce his last name, but it basically kind of delves into a little bit of legend and hearsay with regards to dragons, and we'll get to that later on here in a little bit. But what it tells us is that in the early days of Earth, within the realm of DC Comics, dragons did exist. And that makes sense in DC because, I mean, we've got the whole Greek mythological pantheon. DC is very real world and very grounded with regards to how they do their comics. So in the real world, we hear stories of dragons and old different things like that. I mean, how that gets rectified in the real world, I really don't know. I haven't looked too much into it. I would imagine just like really big lizards. I have no idea. But the fact remains, like legends of dragons and monsters and sea beasts. And yeah, I mean, we know the Megalodon shark is still alive. So, I mean, you know, at least I want to believe that's the case. So things like that are probably true. But the fact remains here that this delves into the idea that dragons were very, very arrogant, very haughty, but were also like rulers of the land. And that falls in play with the idea of, you know, dragons as we think of them in the sense that, you know, man served dragons, not in the sense that they really wanted to, but in the sense that they just kind of had to. But for the most part, the dragons were effectively hunted to extinction, and Dracul was basically the last one. Now, the caveat to all this is that dragons were not easily destroyable. And the reason why is because the only way to really kill a dragon was to basically destroy its heart. But dragons would hide their hearts. They would literally remove them from their bodies. They wouldn't be actual hearts. It would be something that represented the heart of the dragon, like a crystal or something along those lines, but it would basically be the core of its existence. And the dragon would hide it somewhere. So the dragon could just kind of like fly around and it would virtually be indestructible so long as nobody ever found its heart. Now, eventually, this basically led to Dracul just kind of taking up refuge and hiding. Eventually, you know, the armies of the world tried to track it down, but were ultimately unsuccessful and simply walked away. And so all we really knew is that for eons untold, this dragon just kind of existed in hibernation, and that was really it. And so what we do is we actually fast forward by several hundred years to 2001, to basically to the JLA. Now, again, because of the fact that this is an original graphic novel, most all OGNs basically treat whatever team or character they're talking about as if people are reading about about them for the very first time. And it makes sense because, again, these don't fit into existing continuity. You couldn't really go read JLA and expect to find this story in there somewhere. You would just have to kind of walk around a comic book store and then just see JLA League of One. And it's like, well, I wonder what that is. And you see Superman on the cover or Wonder Woman, you pick it up. DC has to treat readers like they've never read these folks before. So again, this really emphasizes the idea that the Justice League of America is as much a humanitarian team as they are a combat team, in the sense that they exist to both serve and protect, as well as like beat the hell out of bad guys. So because of that, they've actually had monuments erected to them. Really, the Pope actually gifted the Justice League a monument that basically has their names made on it. It's made of Parian marble, the same material that Michelangelo used. It's basically one of these instances where the various, humans of the world, whether they're in very powerful religious positions or political positions or just the average person, expresses their appreciation for the actions of the Justice League by presenting them with gifts. Now, under normal circumstances, the Justice League would say no, right? Like if somebody walked up and was like, hey, I really want to thank you for saving my family. Here's like a giant bag of money. The Justice League would probably say no. They'd be stupid for doing it, but they'll probably say no. And so because of that, this is just really one of those things where it has an intrinsic value to the league because it shows that the appreciation for the team is on a pretty grandiose scale. Now, at this point, we switch over to a place called Altdorf, Switzerland. I think it's Altdorf. I'm not sure how to pronounce that properly. A lot of those pronunciations when it comes to a lot of those nations in Europe, I am terrible with. So I apologize if I butchered the name of your town. I'm really sorry. And we actually end up picking up with a couple of goblins. Now, these guys are not wildly important. It's actually Elman and Emmerich, I think is what their names are. But the reason why they're essential here, or at least the reason why they're introduced here, is because while they as individuals are not the most important thing in the world, the actions of the goblins as a whole are important. And the reason why is because they descend from various goblins that had served dragons in the past. Now, the idea was that following the defeat of the dragons, there was really no traditional role for the goblins to undertake, at least it seemed to be the case. And so they just really kind of fell down into the realm of just capturing gold and kind of living underground and doing whatever it is that, they end up doing in their spare time. But eventually they stumble across the tomb of Dracul. And when they do, the idea is to basically wake her up and then continue their role as serving a dragon. Now, the funny thing about this is that this is one of those scenarios where, stories turn into legends, turn into myths, turn into hearsay. No one really knows, or at least they don't know exactly how things used to be. All that really happens is the good stuff is kept. And that's par for the course. I mean, if I were, for example, to, do a bibliography on your entire life, the good and the bad, then as time progressed, if for whatever reason you became some sort of religious figure, people would begin getting rid of the bad things and only keeping the good things, shining you in a positive light. It just makes sense that after a while that would be the case. And that's essentially what happened. I mean, with regards to these goblins and waking up Dracul, they're not, looking at this like, yeah, it's going to be amazing because she's going to like raise the world. No. They're looking at this and saying, oh, it's going to be amazing because we will finally have our purpose back. We will live up to the greatness of our ancestors. We will serve this dragon and restore ourselves to our rightful place. Now, at this point, we switch over to Wonder Woman. And this is when we start to get into this whole, mythological aspect of things, in the sense that we actually pick up with Althea. Now, Althea, as far as I'm aware, is like a wood nymph, more or less. And in the realm of Greek mythology, if I remember this correctly, and I am by no means an expert on Greek mythology, nymphs are basically not really like prime gods, but they basically represent different aspects of things. So like wood nymphs, you'll find them in the woods, they can kind of manipulate the woods and grass and trees and so on. Water nymphs are much the same way. They exist in the water. They can manipulate different facets of water, different things like that. But this really all just kind of ties into the Wonder Woman mythos. And it's really just kind of Christopher kind of giving us this tour of the Wonder Woman landscape, the different kinds of nymphs and gods and goddesses that she comes into contact with, the kind of powers that are bestowed on her whenever she spends time with them, how they grant her gifts and boons and different things like that. For example, turning her into a mermaid, temporarily, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, she's brought before the Oracle of Delphi. Now, this again, or I think it's Delphi, I can't remember how to pronounce that, but again, this is one of those scenarios where the role of Wonder Woman and the life that she leads transcends traditional earthly concepts, which is to say that she leads a life as a superhero, but her allegiance is also very much to the Greek god pantheon and the various things that are entwined as part of it. And so when the Oracle of Delphi basically speaks up and says, there is going to be a great threat coming, that individual who's going to be you is going to battle this threat and is going to die along with all of her teammates, Wonder Woman takes this as an absolute truth. She basically says, okay, according to the Oracle, a dragon or some major threat, some enemy of fire and flame is going to show up. I'm going to have to fight it. I'm going to die in the battle, and so are my teammates. Then she takes absolute allegiance to this. And that's the important thing here, is because at this point, it's no longer an issue of her basically kind of functioning alongside the Justice League and keeping them abreast. From this point forward, it is she's going off, basically going rogue and doing her own thing. Now, with regards to the main JLA themselves, again, this is designed to kind of give us a little bit of the inner workings, in the sense that you have John Jones, who's basically saying, hey, here's everything that's going on right now across the world. We don't really need to band together to face them off, but we do need to kind of deal with them, deal with them appropriately. Now, the reason why these scenarios are being introduced is because it basically gives Wonder Woman the opportunity to incapacitate each member of the Justice League when they're dealing with a threat in the Amazon, and they're dealing with solar flare, and they're dealing with an asteroid that's heading toward Earth, and so on and so forth, the tanker that's basically washed up on shore and threatens to flood the ocean with oil. Because of that, this basically allows John Jones, or at least it allows the Justice League, to split into individuals, who can go and deal with these various threats or team up or whatever the case may be, but it puts them in an otherwise weakened state. Now, under normal circumstances, this wouldn't matter, because unless like Darkseid is attacking or something along those lines, there really isn't, much of an earthbound threat that could lead to the Justice League's complete and total destruction if they were individuals. I mean, for the most part, they can all deal with their own threats, but an attack from within, from Wonder Woman, presents a pretty credible scenario. Now, also notice Batman here, and that's the cool thing about this. Batman is like, he sees and knows all, right? Like, I mean, he's in any situation, and he's immediately calculating what all's going on, what everybody's body language is saying, so on and so forth. But the way that Christopher actually deals with Batman here is pretty cool, and we'll cross that bridge, here in a second, but it's pretty cool the way he like depicts Batman's intelligence, because it doesn't make him like this end-all be-all, I know everything kind of guy. He's very much a guy that simply knows how to use the tools at his disposal, so much as a guy that knows everything that goes on. And so the result is that everybody's effectively paired up. The Flash and you have Batman who are going to go to the Amazon, because it basically looks like Poison Ivy is manipulating trees and so on and so forth to basically flood a lot of the local villages and towns. Superman's going to go check out the solar flare by himself, because it's Superman. And then you have, Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern, is going to go deal with this asteroid, and Wonder Woman and Aquaman, who are going to go deal with this tanker. Now, again, a lot of this is designed because of the fact that these guys would pretty much excel in any one of these particular situations. Superman derives his power from solar energy. It makes perfect sense for him to go check out a solar flare. Kyle Rayner, the current Green Lantern, because remember, at this point in time in the DC landscape, Hal Jordan had basically lost his mind, become parallax, and was believed to have died. And so Kyle Rayner basically took his place as Green Lantern. He's a spacefaring guy, so it makes sense that he would go deal with asteroids. Poison Ivy is an enemy of Batman, and anything that has to do with the oceans, Aquaman gets pissed if you end up screwing it up. So because of that, with Wonder Woman being so strong, really being almost as capable as Superman, which is something they're going to focus on here in a little bit, she ends up going, of course, with Aquaman himself. Now, with regards to the actual idea of Dracul, this is when we start to get into the very dangerous nature of dragons, in the sense that one of the things that John Jones also talks about is that there have been a series of just bizarre and rash robberies that have taken place around Europe, and no one really seems to understand what it is that's going on. I mean, it's like candlesticks, pots and pans, different things like that. But again, the reason why this is done is because of the fact that these are all basically items that are made of gold, and they're being stolen for the purpose of appeasing Dracul. Now, again, we'll get to that here in a minute, but the fact remains that with the Goblins waking Dracul up, this is when they basically begin to receive more than they bargained for. Dracul does one of two things. Either she basically obliterates, whatever goblins are here, or she takes some of them and transforms them into dracognomes. Now, this is kind of a weird scenario, because what Christopher plays on here is very much the myth and mythology of dragons, which is to say, we're given a lot of scenarios on what Dracul does, but we don't know exactly how she does it. She simply just does. And so we'll actually, again, when we get to Wonder Woman, we'll talk about that a little bit, but the fact remains here that picking up with Batman and the Flash, again, it's Batman basically saying, okay, Wonder Woman was acting kind of strange. We're going to leave, grab an item that she left behind, a little strand of hair or something along those lines, and we're going to analyze it and move on. Now, of course, because Martian Manhunter is supposed to be the telepathic link for the Justice League, he's actually the first one to be incapacitated by Wonder Woman. Now, the reason why this matters is because going into JLA, really in the stories following that, and even to some degree before the JLA, Martian Manhunter was kind of like the linchpin for the team, right? Because he had telepathy, what he would do is he would basically create a network for each member of the Justice League, so that when they were off facing their own threats, if Wonder Woman was suddenly like, oh man, there's this major threat that I can't deal with on my own, or if Batman was like, man, there's this major threat I can't deal with on my own, the other members of the Justice League would hear it, and they would respond if they were capable of doing it. So it's basically how each one always knows where the other's at. But Wonder Woman taking out John Jones is pretty smart. It depicts her intelligence and her capabilities, and the fact that she knows her teammates extremely well. Kyle Rayner is the next one. She actually takes him out once he returns back to the Justice League Watchtower. She kind of engages with him a little bit and then takes his ring away. And so he simply has no power whatsoever. He's easily knocked out. With Aquaman, it's the exact same way. Of course, she moves the tanker out of the way, and then immediately seizes Aquaman and drops him off with the water nymphs, with Eon. So again, it's really kind of a cool scenario to see here, because she's incapacitating each individual single member of the League in the way that can easily keep them subdued and keep them held away for any real measure of time. Now, following this, we basically pick up with this idea of Christopher kind of toying with the notion of dragons, and as Dracul makes her way through these different, areas, immediately kind of focusing on Altdorf, the idea here is that she basically is just imbued with hatred, deceit, anger, wrath, so on and so forth, and this basically permeates out to the rest of society at large, sending this city into absolute pandemonium and destruction. Now, half of this destruction is, Dracul and her forces just kind of raising the city. The other half are the people who are just turning in on each other, just kind of becoming inherently violent. And what seems to be happening here, and the indication that's given to us, is that it's really more of like a empathic connection, more so than like a telepathic connection, meaning that Dracul, for whatever reason, is able to basically enhance the emotions of hatred and anger, as opposed to like telepathically taking over the minds of these various humans and forcing them to fight each other. Again, this is very much kind of delving into mythology. It's very much kind of delving into giving us scenarios without giving us any real answers. But that's kind of the cool thing, is it creates some mystery, some intrigue. It doesn't give us every single answer to every single question we have. And that, I think, is actually a mark of good storytelling. If every question you have gets answered, then it takes away your ability to just kind of answer it yourself, make up your own answer, kind of ponder it for a little while because it interests you. It doesn't really leave any mystery or intrigue there. So I kind of like that this is what's happening, that we're not really given definitive answers. Now, with regards to the Flash and Batman, the cool thing about this is that while the Flash is easily able to take out Poison Ivy, Batman basically grabs, or I guess he accesses the computer in the Watchtower over the little thread that it had analyzed. Now, this is why I say the way that Christopher depicts Batman is cool, because some writers will depict him as just knowing everything. Batman's just like, I have observed Wonder Woman's body language and I know exactly what's going on. Some writers will do that, and it stretches the limits of credulity even for a comic book. But when you have something like this, where Batman's basically just accessing this computer system and says, analyze that sample that I gave you, and the computer says, okay, I'm analyzing it, whatever. It basically goes all the way back to a particular location, and then Batman deduces that this is basically from the range of the Delphi, from the Oracle of Delphi, tracing it even further, cross-referencing it with all these weird little scenarios of thievery and these weird, burglaries that have taken place, ultimately comes back to this realization that it's all coming out of a place called Altdorf. And then after that, the question is, why are things being stolen? So then it's analyze myths, analyze legends. This doesn't seem to make any sense. Let's try delving into things that don't make any sense. This eventually leads him to the idea of a dragon. That in 1348, the Prince of Amadeus, a story of the Prince of Amadeus and the dragon. And then from there, it's just kind of expanding and kind of going on. Now, we as readers would kind of look at that and say, well, that seems kind of silly. But when you're talking about a story that exists in the realm of like an alien from outer space with super strength and a guy who can run super fast and a Greek mythological being, who came from some paradise island that fights against, various enemies and so on and so forth, it's not that far out of the realm of possibility, especially when you're dealing with Wonder Woman. And that's why Batman is going to these lengths. With regards to the Flash, this is kind of a cool scenario because Wonder Woman would not be able to take out the Flash in hand-to-hand combat just because of the fact that he's too fast. And so instead, she actually uses the environment against him. In this instance, it's a wood nymph that actually trips him up, that basically just kind of brings up, a little bit of a branch and then trips him, and it results in him falling. Now, the way that Christopher does this, it kind of gives us two scenarios that we can sort of toy with. The first is that either he just reduced the speed of Wally West while he was running. The second half is that it could just be that Wally West just isn't running as fast as he could. And that makes sense. I mean, if he's just like, hey, okay, I defeated Poison Ivy, let's go find Batman, he's not going to run at his absolute fastest speed. He's not going to run so fast that he can outrun the universe. He doesn't need to. He's just like, let's just go find Batman. So it would be like you just kind of walking at a casual pace, except for the Flash, he's walking insanely fast. So because of this, it's easy for him to be kind of tripped up. Now, the other half of this is Wonder Woman toying with the Flash himself, in the sense that Wally kind of has this tendency to say, okay, look, I've achieved my goal. I can let my guard down now. And because of that, preying on that moment allows Wonder Woman to basically incapacitate him and knock him out. Now, also, it's an ally. And so Wally, the Flash would have no reason to believe that Wonder Woman would be out to get him. Now, of course, following this and following, the Flash basically being taken by Wonder Woman and put in stasis, Batman, of course, grabs this tree nymph and says, look, tell me everything you know. Now, of course, this is under threat of coercion, basically the idea that it'll cause some kind of crazy biological reaction to her, whatever the case may be. But all these guys are basically being put in pods with the intention of sending them out on a course. So we'll actually find out what this is, and it's really a genius decision by Wonder Woman. But again, Batman kind of arrives on the scene and says, look, that weird little tree nymph told me everything that's going on. Now, this is kind of cool because Batman actually makes Wonder Woman out to be a villain here. What he basically says is, if what this Oracle said is true, that some threat is coming and that you have to face it, and that if we all go, we're all going to die, then you should trust us. Like, there will be a way for us to make it out of this alive. Wonder Woman is feeding on this notion that she has with regards to to Greek mythology. And that's kind of the cool thing, is when it comes to everything that goes on in DC Comics, Greek mythological gods and so on and so forth, there are some things that the Justice League will not be able to understand. And it has nothing to do with the fact that they're guys. It has everything to do with the fact that they simply just don't come from that part of the world. They have never lived that life. So it would be like you as an American trying to understand, or trying to relate to the inner workings of, French society that is deeply rooted in tradition. You're not from that life. You couldn't really understand that life. You could educate yourself, but at the end of the day, you would never be a French person having a family that goes into all that steeped tradition. That's never going to be your life. And that's how it is with Wonder Woman. With regards to her existence, the way that she functions, she comes from a world that none of the other superheroes can ever comprehend, in the same way that none of them can ever really understand what it means to be a Kryptonian, because they're not Kryptonian. So again, it's kind of a cool scenario, but ultimately she ends up incapacitating Batman and actually defeating him. Now, the way that she's forced to do this is with her lasso of truth, because the lasso cannot be broken by someone unless they deny a legitimate truth, or really Wonder Woman unless she denies a legitimate truth. And even then, I don't think the lasso can traditionally be broken. It has before, but only under the conditions like the story calls for it. In this scenario, even if Batman wanted to break it, he wouldn't be able to pull it off because he's just a regular guy. The fact remains that with Batman having been defeated, all that's really left is Superman. And so essentially Wonder Woman just kind of goes about her business with the intention of taking out this dragon, and Superman arrives on the scene. Now, under normal circumstances, we would expect to see this as a long drawn out fight. I mean, we would expect to see a great big huge conflict like we saw in, Wonder Woman number 219, I think it was. It was an Infinite Crisis tie-in when she beat the hell out of Superman. That's not what happens here. Instead, what she does is she basically kind of roughs him up a bit, but she doesn't actually defeat him. And the reason why is because of the fact that she basically says, look, I have put Batman and I've put the Green Lantern, Kyle Rayner, and I've put the Flash in pods and I've sent them to the asteroid belt. They've got 15 minutes or 10 minutes of oxygen remaining. Your job is to go and find them. Now, in truth, if it came down to it, let's say, for example, that Wonder Woman had just like tied them up and left them in the watchtower, or just put them in stasis pods and didn't actually jettison them into space, and it was just her and Superman fighting, she would probably win, to be honest, because Superman would like pull his punches or something along those lines, but she would fight until he was dead. That would be her goal, would be to legitimately kill him. And so because of that, she basically says, look, your job is to go save the rest of the Justice League, but the reason why I'm doing this is because of the fact that there is a credible threat out there and I'm the only one who can really deal with it. And so the cool thing about this is that once Wonder Woman basically arrives to confront Dracul, this is when a lot of this kind of mythology begins to come into play. Because of the fact that Dracul basically preys on deceit, it preys on a lack of confidence, different things like that. When Wonder Woman reveals her name to the dragon, it gives the dragon a sort of power over her. Now, we're not given the extent of what this power is, that is to say, exactly how it works. It really seems more like the power is able to kind of harness her soul to a degree, maybe grab her essence, kind of force her into giving answers that she wouldn't normally give. But again, it's not like possession, right? It's not like she speaks her name and the dragon just like possesses Wonder Woman. It's not like she speaks her name and the dragon's just like, now I have telepathic control over you. It doesn't work that way. It's really more of like a subtle influence over the essence of Wonder Woman, more so than anything else. But that's kind of the weird scenarios, because it's things like, oh, Wonder Woman's been bewitched and so on and so forth. And so ultimately the dragon does not give its name to Wonder Woman. Instead, the dragon simply says its name is like Joan of Arc. And so what this seems to indicate is that in this realm of mythology and so on and so forth, the giving of the name grants a person power over whoever it was that gave their name. And so where Wonder Woman gave her name willingly to Dracul, if Dracul were to do the same thing, it would give Wonder Woman some measure or influence over the dragon itself. And so from here, she basically seizes one of the dracognomes or whatever it is and uses her lasso of truth to force the name of Dracul from the dragon. After which, she basically says, look, I know who you are, I know what you're about, I'm going to go to your cave and I'm going to destroy your heart. Now, this is what's really smart about this, is because Wonder Woman doesn't know where the cave is. She has no idea how to access it. Instead, by making this declaration, by making this statement, by appearing to the dragon and basically saying, look, the fates have decreed that you are going to die and I'm going to be the one that destroys you, while I wouldn't say it scares the dragon, it certainly gives Dracul pause for concern. And so the result is that she actually takes off for her own base. Wonder Woman hides and watches where it goes. And so again, that's the coolest thing about this story, is because it shows us that Wonder Woman's really, really smart. She's very ingenuitive, she's very cunning, she's not just some really good looking chick who can just beat people up. She's actually very capable in the kind of things that she can do. Now from here, once she arrives inside the cave of Dracul, she's met with Elman. Now again, Elman is one of these goblins that basically wasn't turned into a Draconome, but Elman provides a lot of explanation and a lot of discussion here with regards to the nature of Dracul. And this is again, really Christopher just kind of grabbing one of the different mythological interpretations of why dragons love gold so much. And this has been told in different ways. There are some stories that say that dragons love gold because they just love hoarding riches. There are others who say that dragons are inherently drawn to gold, and so dragons just kind of have this compulsion to grab gold. In this scenario, what we're basically told is that dragons actually feed on gold, and when they eat this gold, the gold in turn is absorbed and it basically adds to their scales, making them harder, making them more durable. Not only that, because of the fact that wars have been fought over gold, because of the fact that men have killed other men over gold, what this means is that the evil nature of their actions has effectively bonded itself to that gold, and by consuming it, Dracul is basically consuming or really kind of filling herself with the essence of evil. Now, this raises some pretty cool concepts, and it's actually a genius idea. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that, let's say for example that a dragon is born, right? If we were to take this nature versus nurture stance, and we were to say that a dragon is like a newborn baby, it has to learn about the world around it. It's taught what to like, what to dislike. It's taught what to hate and what to love, so on and so forth. If a dragon were to simply just say, okay, I'm a newborn, but I eat gold in the same way that a baby will nurse from its mother, then by eating that gold, it'll basically become evil, because evil is tied to that gold. And so it's kind of a cool scenario, because then it would beg the question, if you had like a pet dragon and you just fed it like Hostess snacks all day long, would it become bad? I think it'd be kind of cool to see somebody like feeding a dragon Twinkies. That'd be kind of cool. I think it'd be hilarious. But again, this is really kind of cool. It delves into a lot of this mythology. It delves into a lot of these, questions, these things that we don't have definitive answers to, mostly because dragons don't exist anymore, which I kind of wish they did. But at this point, Wonder Woman making her presence known to Dracul leads to Dracul basically firing off this balefire or banefire or something like that, and basically hitting Wonder Woman's own bracelets. Now, again, what this does is it basically says, look, because of the fact that it hit these bracelets that she has, which are nigh indestructible, and it's able to cause some measure of damage, then it would have meant if like Superman or if Flash or if Batman or any of these guys had been hit by this fire, it probably would have incinerated them. And the whole statement of Dracul that like no mortal can survive the balefire's touch, this again tells us that there are things out there that just transcend our traditional stance on superheroes, that there's a great big huge myriad of possibilities when it comes to the DC landscape, when it comes to like the Wonder Woman mythos, when you're dealing with gods and goddesses and so on and so forth. There's all kinds of different crazy scenarios that take place out there. Now, of course, from this point, it's really more of Dracul kind of messing with Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman kind of shows up and says, look, you've tried to destroy me. I have survived. This clearly shows that I'm going to be the one that takes you down, but I do not want to kill you. Instead, give me your molten heart and I will hold it as collateral and as a good faith exchange to show that I have no intention of killing you. Now, of course, Dracul just kind of bows and says, yes, you've shown me your greater strength, and then immediately attacks Wonder Woman and races off with her heart. Now, again, at this point, it's really more of a scenario of fear. It's really one of the first times in however many millennia that Dracul has been alive that it's begun to experience fear, because what it's encountered is a being that it can't readily destroy. And so because of this, the conflict, the final battle between the two of them is actually pretty straightforward. But the idea seems to be basically confronting evil with goodness. Now again, a lot of mythological stuff, a lot of metaphors, a lot of unanswered questions, but it's really this idea that because of the fact that Wonder Woman is able to wield the lasso of truth, it means that she allies herself with truth. She allies herself with justice. She allies herself with righteousness. And so because of this, she is basically the antithesis of Dracul, essentially meaning that good wins out over evil. And in this opportunity, by weakening the dragon using her lasso of truth, she in turn destroys the heart of the dragon, which leads to it exploding. And that's really kind of it. I mean, the dragon just kind of blows up and the fight's pretty much over. But again, the overall gist of this was to basically show the lengths that Wonder Woman would go to in order to protect the Justice League and fulfill her destiny as a warrior. But it's also basically saying that Wonder Woman is a woman of two worlds. She is an Amazonian and, part of the Greek mythological landscape, but she's also a traditional superhero fighting alongside the Justice League of America. And she allies herself to both. And this becomes prevalent when Superman basically says, you betrayed my trust. That as a member of the Justice League, you should have told us what was going on. You should have kept us informed of what it was that was happening. Even if you were adamant about the fact that you had to face it off on your own, you should have trusted us with this information. We should have come to this conclusion as a team. Now, again, this is not DC saying, yes, yes, Wonder Woman cannot do things by herself because she's a woman. No. It's not them saying that. It's DC saying that Justice League is a family. They encounter problems as a team, they face those problems as a team, and they overcome those problems as a team. That's the basis of the team. That's the function of the Justice League, is to always face threats together as a group. And so ultimately, when the question was asked, are you going to pull a stunt like this again? Wonder Woman's response is, the Justice League is my family. And if it means that I have to incapacitate all of you again in order to make sure that you stay safe, that's exactly what I will do. And so that's the only promise that I can give you. I will fight you and I will defeat you if it means keeping you safe and going off to face some threat on my own. So again, the story really kind of wraps up at this point. I mean, it's really kind of brought to an end, but in my mind, it's really one of the greatest Wonder Woman stories ever told. I mean, this is absolutely amazing. It's almost as good as Hikatea. I love Hikatea a whole lot more, but this is pretty solid. But anyway, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.